Thank you very much. Really excited to be here and be with this group today. Love HMI. It's something that both myself and my team at Perception are incredibly passionate about. And so today I want to talk to everybody a little bit about our point of view on HMI through the lens of superheroes, hypercars, and cinematic HMI. So to start off, I want to just give you a quick background on Perception, the studio that I work with, and what we do. We've carved out a oddly specific niche for ourselves. We are hyper focused on creative design for a very specific kind of work that has two tracks or two paths. And we describe it as we spend our time prototyping the future. And we do this for feature films, and we do this for real world technologies. So in film, we are creating the fictional technologies that you see in blockbuster movies like the Iron Man films, various other superhero movies, RoboCop, and things like that. We love doing that kind of work. We take it unbelievably seriously. We try and look at these ways that fictional technology is created and invented to appear in these films and elevate it beyond just sort of what we describe as like they're just being glowing blue shit everywhere all the time in movies. And I think in this audience, I know many of you have watched these movies and you can look at the screen and say like, all right, that's not the way that technology really works, or that doesn't make sense. So there's no proper logic that's driving that. And we're trying to do our best to solve those problems and make it something that's a little more grounded or realistic, but also still very imaginative and forward thinking whenever possible. So that's about 50% of what we do at Perception. The other 50% that we do is collaborating with some of the biggest names in real world technology and product design, including some niche industries, one of which that we are very passionate about is automotive. And we've been working in automotive, we've been working in aerospace, other niche spaces like military grade cybersecurity, but also on a lot of consumer facing products, a lot of things that fall into the category of emerging technologies. And effectively what we've found is that, there's a lot that we like to celebrate about the overlap between these two worlds. Like I think of these two worlds as these are separate planets, and our satellite or our spaceship is weaving around them. And some of the insights that we gather when we're doing blue sky ideation for a feature film can sometimes be valuable in our work in real world technology. And a lot of the insights that we pick up in working in real world tech and being exposed to some of the most exciting R&D laboratories in the world is stuff that we try to work back into our work in fiction. So we're doing this infinite loop around these two planets. And we like to think that every lap that we take, we're getting a little faster, a little smarter, a little more potent at what we do. And I think at the end of the day for us, it comes down to this idea of solving new problems for technologies where there is no template, where there's no existing best practices, where there's things that we're still trying to figure out how do certain three-dimensional interaction paradigms work, or how do we create a visual presence for an artificial intelligence that isn't insulting the user in trying to trick it into thinking that it's really a human or things like that. So there's a lot of fun work that we're doing in many different spaces, but we've definitely found that our approach and our mindset has resonated really well in the automotive space. And, we're working in automotive on all sorts of different things, from designing and doing all the production work, from the basic, foundational UX frameworks, all the way through the prototyping and asset delivery and development for HMI solutions that'll be in dealerships in the next 2 to 3 years, to exploring future vision concepts that are to help serve as like a North Star for some of these major brands to follow and look at into the future, looking at a lot of different ways that different emerging technologies can be brought into the automotive experience, whether that's artificial intelligence or augmented reality, even doing a lot of work recently with sonic branding and creating some of these propulsion sounds and finding some really interesting ways to create new strategies so that when our vehicles are making generated sounds for us, that there's a logic and a purpose that's driving it. It's not just neato sound effects. Another reason that we find our experience resonates particularly well in the automotive space is because we are passionate automotive enthusiasts. My father has been a racing instructor for the last 25 years, and it's not uncommon for us to have, a family gathering at one of the Northeast United States racetracks that are in our region. We're very passionate about everything automotive, both the history and the future potential that we see ahead of it, as well as motorsports and a lot of the exciting components that come in with that. So I want to take a moment and just talk about a little more about our perspective to designing for film. And when we're working on these feature films, our focus is on this core idea of the technology of the future and how it can exist as not just set dressing or wallpaper that's in the background, but how it can be something that is more of a world building element, something that invites viewers to be curious about these films and these worlds that they take place in, and the society that surrounds these universes that are existing in a very heightened reality. My favorite example of this is the work that we did for Marvel Studios' Black Panther. And for a studio like us, this was a dream brief to receive. Marvel came to us and said, we want you guys to develop technologies for the futuristic world of Wakanda. Now, it's important that this world of Wakanda has the most advanced technology that has ever been seen in any film. But also, the technology in Wakanda cannot be influenced by any of our existing technologies in the real world. It needs to feel totally distinct and unique to this very special culture that is depicted in Marvel Studios' Black Panther. So when starting on this project, the first thing that we did was an enormous amount of research and these sort of technology audits that we will do, looking at different technologies and general phenomena in the world that we think are relevant to the target that we have in front of us. One of the first things that started popping up on our radar was we knew very little about the film at this point. We were putting these ideas together while the script for the movie was still being finished. And one of the few things that we knew was that the society of Wakanda celebrated and was built around the idea of this magic element of vibranium. And so for us, this idea of vibranium, well, what does that mean? Vibranium, it sounds like it ties into sound. So we started looking at different technologies and phenomena that tie into sound and into vibration. And we pretty quickly came across the idea of cymatics. Cymatics is this phenomenon where certain sound frequencies will actually create visual patterns displayed before your eyes. We looked at that, we were like, oh, it's perfect. It's beautiful. It's iconic. It has almost like a tribal aesthetic to it. We're also really interested in the ideas of acoustic levitation. Now, this was something that was actually inspired from some past automotive work that we had done. A few years before working on Black Panther, we were doing some tests with the Ultra Haptics ultrasonic transducer array. This is an array of transducers that sends ultrasonic sound waves up into the air. And if you were to hold your hand over it, imagine this being mounted in the center console of a car, you could feel midair haptics or feel the sensation of touch in midair. This is actually something that Srikanth was talking about during his presentation yesterday, very briefly. But we were doing some work with the ultra haptics sonic transducer array, And when we were doing that work, we discovered that at the University of Tokyo, they were using the same transducers, not for midair haptics, but to actually levitate styrofoam particles in air and to be able to make them animate and move around and sort of translate their position using these ultrasonic sound waves to move these little bits of particulate. And we thought, well, that's really, really fascinating. That's really interesting. And maybe there's a way that we could say that in Black Panther, there could be displays or technologies, and rather than being the traditional hologram that we've seen in like almost every science fiction movie as just like glowing blue light being emitted in a scene, what if the holograms in the world of Wakanda as seen in Black Panther were made of vibranium sand or these vibranium particulate that would be levitated in the air using these ultrasonic sound waves to create these more physical holograms unlike anything else that we've seen in film. So just based on this initial consultation that we did with the filmmakers, they fell in love with this idea and this concept. And it pretty quickly became something that is seen throughout the film Black Panther. We have this tactical table that's inside T'Challa's aircraft that he uses to bring up these volumetric three-dimensional tactical maps that he can use to survey what's happening with his enemies and his foes on the ground below him. So as we were developing these ideas, we went through a process that involved even creating our own sand table to have in our office so that we could make sure that we were holding ourselves true to the concept and the idea of interacting with and feeling the grain of sand and what happens when you're manipulating it with your hands, when you're feeling around with it, and finding ways to say, like, can any of our interactions or any of our gestures feel like they're not just touchscreen interactions, but tied more to the physical qualities of sand. We even played with embedding displays into our sand table to see how light would move through the natural translucency of sand. And there were all these fun experiments that came together and ended up being displayed throughout the film Black Panther in a number of different ways. So I'm going to play right now a montage of all of the different elements that we contributed to Marvel Studios' Black Panther. So you'll see here many instances and variations on this idea of the vibranium sand and how that was implemented as a tactical display. There were other kinds of displays and interfaces that we created, looking for ways to make them a little more unique and distinct to this world of Wakanda. We revisited the vibranium sand as a communications device. When the characters do a sort of Skype with each other, they're using the vibranium sand. We also looked at different ways to create unique information structures that could capture data and information in the character Shuri's laboratory, including this awesome car chase scene where she's sort of remotely piloting a vehicle on the other side of the world. All of these ideas even ended up culminating into figuring out the way that Black Panther's suit would build on and wrap around him, and how we could leverage this idea of these like nanoparticle technologies and have them follow these luminescent line work that would build on around the characters to capture them within the costume. The director of the film actually asked us to then look at creating a whole prologue sequence that opens the film with a sort of millions of years ago kind of story that sets up the world of Wakanda. And then we also bookended the film at the very end with a main on end title sequence that plays out as a sort of like almost music video that celebrates the film that is led up to it. This was so much fun to put this together and to create these scenes using this technology paradigm, but also making it a little more celebratory, a little more colorful. And also we had a song made for this title sequence by Kendrick Lamar himself, which like kind of blew my fucking mind that we had that opportunity to have that and put together this this title sequence that capped off our experience working on Black Panther. So I want to turn a corner and talk a little bit about some of our work in the automotive space. And I'll speak really briefly about our first ever experience working in automotive. This was many, many years back, and it was a potent one. We did all of the initial design work and theming for the HMI for the 2017 Ford GT. And for me, being an automotive enthusiast, this was an absolute dream come true kind of project to be able to work on and collaborate with the team at Ford to put together a vehicle and a vehicle digital experience that was really unique. One of the really nice things about working on the Ford GT is it is a very specific use case scenario, right? We are designing a car that does not have any concern whatsoever for many traditional uses of a vehicle. And we held our HMI to that same sort of point of view, in that we needed to make sure that every single decision made, every single pixel that was arranged on screen had to be designed very specifically to ensure that drivers were getting faster lap times. We worked closely with Scott Maxwell, who is the development driver on the vehicle and a former Le Mans winner himself, and developed this instrument cluster layout that was designed from our perspective to be first and foremost really Spartan, really clear, and really direct. When you're going 150 miles per hour on the straightaway of a racetrack and heading into a sharp corner, you don't want to be, hunting on your display to find the critical information. So we put together the idea of a generous, oversized gear indicator and the largest possible tachometer that we could. And we looked for all these different ways that we could embellish and make, add cool little touches to this instrument cluster. But at the end of the day, it was really important that any of those touches had to be sort of like cleverly embedded into the experience in a way that would heighten your understanding of what the vehicle is doing and how it's functioning. One of my favorite examples of this is the way that in the instrument cluster, if you look at the leading edge of the tachometer, the leading edge of the tachometer is a white bar that actually expands and contracts. And it's doing that based on throttle position. So rather than just having a separate display that says like, here's how open or closed the throttle is, we wanted to sort of roll it directly into this. And it serves another nice purpose, which is that when you are stepping on the throttle as hard as you possibly can, that's the boldest, that's the clearest, that's the thickest that the leading edge of the tachometer ever is. So we're always overflowing with ideas for cool little widgets or gadgets or little visual functions, but it's really critical to us that we make sure that those aren't over cluttering the display, that they're not getting in the way of some of the key functionality that a driver like Scott Maxwell is going to be expecting. So the last project that I'll touch on and I'll go a little bit deeper into is one of our most recent projects that we are able to share with the world. As you can imagine, we've got all sorts of really exciting stuff that we're doing that we've finished in the past or that we're currently doing that's closely guarded under wraps. But we're really proud of our collaboration with General Motors on the new Hummer EV and the way that we were able to bring a new point of view to the HMI within the Hummer EV. So putting this together, I'll play a quick video that shows a little bit of an overview of a few of the key functions within the vehicle HMI, starting with this dramatic lunar welcome animation that sets the tone and the mood for the digital experience within the vehicle. And then you'll immediately notice in the center stack display, we have multiple different off-road visualizations that are telling you critical information about the way that the vehicle is functioning and encouraging the driver to sort of take advantage of some of these insane capabilities that the vehicle has. When you trigger a mode change event, we get this beautiful cinematic animation that comes up on the screen to also illustrate what the different modes in the vehicle are capable of and give the driver a slightly better understanding as to how those elements function. So a lot of really fun stuff happening in the Hummer EV HMI. One of the biggest pieces of this was these off-road visualizations, which there's actually a number of them, which every single one of them, we spent a ton of time designing and developing and ideating on how these could function and how they could work and come together. Some of them being a little more raw data-centric critical information, some of them having much more expressive visualizations of what the vehicle is capable of, and what you can, how you can utilize the vehicle in exciting and dramatic ways. And every single one of them had a very thoughtful process of development. One of the favorites is this pitch and roll gyroscope. We've seen in off-road vehicles before a dial for pitch and a dial for roll, but we started talking with GM very early on about the idea of like, well, what if we could combine them both into a rich three-dimensional visualization? GM then in turn started looking at on their end at how this could be executed, and ultimately developed a great partnership with Unreal Engine, the game engine company, who was able to provide us with ways that we could start to integrate instances of Unreal Engine 4 into the Hummer EV HMI, the perfect opportunity to bring something like this to life. Now, when we came up with this idea, it was an interesting sketch at first, but everyone started asking, well, could this work? Could we actually understand this? And so we started by making just simple lo-fi mock-ups. At our core at Perception, we have a tremendous love for animation and the capabilities and the abilities that you get when working with animation, how quickly you can mock something up and bring it to life in a way where our audience or our clients will start to understand, okay, I can see how this would work. And so we were putting these different iterative tests together, just as simple proof of concept to say, all right, can we see an accurate view of how the vehicle is rocking and rolling or pitching and rolling? And then how can we ensure that there's other key visualizations like our little red and yellow flags to make sure that the driver can get accurate information out of this and not just see like, oh, the car's tipping forward a little bit, but be able to understand how far is it tipping, how far is it leaning, how much pitch and roll are we actually getting? And so we ultimately were able to develop this really rich experience that plays out beautifully within the Hummer EV's HMI. So another thing that I'd like to touch on is when we are working on these projects, we are taking a very UX first perspective as we're putting these ideas together. But it's really critical to us that we're also finding ways to tap into our cinematic roots. And I'm going to play for you guys a presentation piece. This was a video that we described as a teaser trailer that we used to present the Hummer HMI internally at General Motors, from design leadership to all the way up to the president of General Motors, and to try and capture the spirit and the mood and the excitement of what we were putting together. So we leveraged our cinematic skill set and put together this short film that builds up this sense of anticipation and teases out the excitement of the vehicle and the lunar theme, and then ultimately displays our HMI in the most exciting way possible. And so I don't know how well the super epic, mega dramatic music is coming through over Zoom, but as we're presenting a short film like this with our work contained within, we find it's a really emotional experience, especially for the team that we're communicating with, who are working on this project, who have been working on this project for years, who have been seeing this vehicle from initial sketches. When they get a glimpse of something that has this insanely cinematic caliber to its presentation, it really is an emotional experience for everyone to kind of step back and say, wow, we are making something very special here. We are putting together something that is very dramatic, very exciting, and potentially very potent for the automotive community as a whole. So we love finding ways to take, again, some of our background and our experience in filmic storytelling, in visual effects, in animation, and find ways to bring those in to the HMI experience to help make these points, to convey our intent, and to also to help take, it goes without saying, but designing an HMI within a massive automotive organization is incredibly hard. It is a very difficult thing, especially when you are trying to innovate, especially when you're trying to experiment with new ideas and concepts, when you're trying to push new paradigms that have never been seen before. It can be really difficult to motivate the organization as a whole to take those risks and take on those challenges. And so, looking at the landscape of automotive HMI, we always come back to conversations about, all right, well, what's, the end of the day, and this is something that I'm very used to, is being in a room or on a conference call, and at the end of the conversation, there's someone that raises their hand and says, well, that's nice and all, but what does all that fake movie crap have to do with these real world products, these things that people are taking their lives into their own hands as they sit inside of? And there's a lot of parallels that we like to celebrate there. There's just the core ideas of glanceable information consumption. If you look closely at any of these films that we work on, many of these moments or these futuristic technologies that you see, they are on screen for fractions of a second at a time. And they are designed very carefully to be bold and clear and even animate or move in ways that will convey their intent at an absolute glance. But there's also a lot more that comes with that cinematic experience. There's the paradigms of storytelling and conveying, establishing a deeper understanding between the user and the product that they're interacting with. And one of the most important things is also developing an emotional connection. It's one of the reasons that we love working on vehicles as opposed to designing digital experiences for things like these. Vehicles really celebrate the emotional connection that we can have with them. And so that emotional connection also is really important, not just for the customer, but internally within the organization, to get folks excited about these opportunities, or to get them to push down new barriers or make the proper investments, or to engage in pushing these boundaries further than they may have previously anticipated doing. So I want to thank the organizers of Car HMI for inviting me out here. I've been super excited to have a conversation here, and I'm very disappointed that I don't get to meet everybody in person. I've seen a ton of familiar names in the chat room. But please, nobody be a stranger. Do not hesitate to reach out to me, ping me on the side. I love geeking out about this stuff to no end. I could talk about this stuff all day long. Chris is about to, cut my Zoom signal. But at any point, nobody be a stranger. And I hope to get a chance to talk to as many of you as possible, and to hopefully connect at a Car HMI in person in the future. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, John. Very compelling presentation, and looking at some of the comments in the chat, I think it was incredibly well received by the Car HMI audience. So we do look forward to seeing you soon. Hopefully next Car HMI conference. We have a few questions that came in. One was on the Ford GT, asking how much feedback did you get from drivers on what you did, and did you have to adapt anything based on their feedback?
So we started with anecdotal feedback from some internal executives at Ford, who, before we had even started designing, one of the things that they were bringing up was, like, in a lot of these supercars, the speedometer is so small that it's hard to track. And Scott Maxwell, the development driver, eventually he kind of said, well, you know what? It's not as important to me. The big, bold gear indicator, like as big as you can make it. And if you look at these endurance racing cars and the quite frankly, the very utilitarian displays that they will have in the dashboards, that gear indicator is always the most dominant thing. Now, the thing that shocked me or surprised me was that one of the things that Scott Maxwell insisted on was seeing a 4-digit numerical readout of the RPM. And I thought, well, what if we just did like 3.2 thousand? That's surely enough. And he said, no, I need all 4 digits. that is how I am determining like my corner entry speed, and I want the most precision there. And I couldn't believe it. And he proved it. He has an unbelievable level of sensitivity and awareness when he's driving a vehicle like the Ford GT.
Wow. One other two-part question. One, just a quick one. Was the Hummer project all rendered in Unreal? And then the follow-up from the same person, more on, do you see this futuristic user interface style basically growing a lot more among OEMs? Do you think that's going to become the dominant kind of design style for future vehicles?
So for the Hummer HMI, it's a combination of a number of different platforms. Unreal is one of them, but it is not the dominant platform that is driving the entire platform. But it is something that they're leveraging currently, and I think we're seeing Unreal adopted in many different places within automotive HMI, and I think we expect to see its presence or its role in the HMI backend increasing over the next couple of generations. In terms of this futuristic interface aesthetic, it's important to me that we be very careful or very sensitive to the idea that futuristic is like, it's just the style of the future, right? Like it doesn't mean it is the future. And I think it's really appropriate for the Hummer. I think the Hummer is a vehicle that has an insane amount of personality and this incredible presence. And I think it's really appropriate for the Hummer EV. But many of the other vehicles that we work on, we don't feel that it's important to treat it as though it is a product of like science fiction or whatnot. It needs to be typically first and foremost a product that a human is going to be interacting with. And so while I wouldn't say we pursue the idea of like futuristic design or designing in the style of what we think the future will be, we're always looking for ways that we can let the technological advances push us in terms of the opportunities that we can take advantage of, and make sure that we're tying in directly to the personality of the vehicle. We have done HMIs that are, you know, the Hummer feels very consistent with our body of work in film, which is like meant to, like, everything looks like it's at like high levels of suspense and action and intensity.
Right.
But we've made HMI that is like cute, that is approachable, that is inviting, that is warm, and whatnot. And I think it's really critical that we not just get lost with the idea of like, oh, well, this is going to come out in the future, so we have to make something very futuristic, and just stay tuned into the personality of the vehicle itself.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John, for taking time today. It was good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.